So understanding as a leader and as a parent and as a woman that resilience is a set of skills, but there's no guarantee that you will always be as resilient as you mean to be. There are things that can drain our resilience temporarily, and we got to allow for that in ourselves.
Welcome to Get Real, Get Results. I'm your host, Chantell Preston. I've got over 2 decades of experience in healthcare operations, project management, and consulting, and I've navigated the dance of career advancement and personal satisfaction firsthand. Get Real, Get Results is your go-to resource for navigating the complexities of a modern-day success without sacrificing your well-being. So buckle up and get ready to challenge the status quo, shatter limiting beliefs, and embark on a transformative journey toward a more authentic, balanced, and fulfilling life. This is Get Real, Get Results, and I'm honored to have you join me. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Chantell Preston with Get Real, Get Results. Today, I've got a great guest on for us. Some of the things that we've been talking about over the last couple episodes. Deborah Gilboa, MD, Dr. G. She's a resilience expert, and she works with families, educators, executives, and businesses to identify mindset and strategies to turn stress to an advantage, which I think is fascinating because, as we've always talked about, stress is a negative. Dr. G is going to tell us how it's a positive. So she's a leading media personality. She's been seen regularly on the Today Show, Good Morning America. She also is a regular resilient experts for the doctors. She's also been frequently featured in the Washington Post, the New York Times, Huffington Post, and countless other digital and print outlets. Not only is she an awesome physician helping out a lot of folks, both teenagers, women, men, but she's just an incredible person. I had the opportunity to meet Dr. G at a YPO event with a mother-daughter retreat. And so she just gave me some really amazing insight in regards to my relationship with my daughter, which expanded our conversation even more to a lot of other things. And then realizing with some of the things that I wanted to accomplish with my podcast and folks around me of just how do we continue to build resilient women, I thought she'd be an amazing guest for us today. So, Dr. G, thank you so much for being here today. It's been a while since we've seen each other, but obviously I've been keeping tabs on everything that you're doing. So let's just jump in if you don't mind.
I don't mind. Let's do it.
I love it. So we talked earlier, we could probably talk for hours. So we're going to try to keep this, minimal for everyone out there. But one of the things that we do in the podcast is really talk about some of the lies we've been told as kids, especially women. And one of the things that I was always told is stress is a bad thing. I grew up in a home where, we didn't like change. I mean, I think in my earlier days, I hated change. And now as I've gotten older, I've learned to kind of embrace it because it happens and it needs to happen. So kind of give us some insight in regards to stress and how can stress be a positive thing for everyone?
So the thing that I think women are taught often is that if we're stressed, it's because we're doing life wrong somehow. We're either saying yes to too many things, or we're not using our time well, or we're taking on too many of other people's feelings. And that's total shenanigans. Our brain has a reaction to change, all change, even good change. And that reaction is to secrete stress chemicals. So saying stress is bad is a totally understandable outgrowth of 2 things. One, it feels awful. And if you have too much of it, it can be dangerous. But I would argue that you can say those same 2 things about exercise.
Interesting.
It often feels awful. And if you do too much of it, it can be dangerous or damaging, right?
True statement. But let's peel that onion back a little bit because you say, it's okay to do a lot of things. And one of the podcasts I did was we don't have to say yes to everything because I think as women, we're just in tune to say, yes, I got it. No problem. We'll do it because we just do things. So talk about the type of stress you're referencing. Is it any kind of stress? Is it, being selective? Talk a little bit more about that.
So here's what I want to do. I want to start from change. You talked about stress and you immediately talked about change, and that's correct. Our brains interpret all change as stressful. Chantell, I'm going to take you way back. In like junior high or high school, did you take biology?
Yes.
Okay. So probably because you're almost as old as I am, you had a spiral notebook for
maybe
vocabulary
a little older.
words.
Right. Yes. Yes.
You had it, right? You had a spiral notebook. You wrote down vocabulary words because they'd be on the quiz on Friday or whatever. And at some point you wrote down the word homeostasis.
Mm-hmm.
Homeostasis is our body and our brain's desire to keep things in a really tight range. And a good example that everybody's familiar with is body temperature. We know, and I think most of your listeners are on Fahrenheit here in the US, we know that a normal body temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That I could be outside in 110 degree heat or outside in 0 degrees or less, and my body's going to do everything it can to keep my internal temperature very close to 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, right? That's an example of homeostasis. My body will do, whether it's sweating and trying to offload heat because it's too hot out, or I'm trying to shiver, my muscles will shiver and my teeth will chatter, trying to keep me warm, to keep me up to 98.6. That's homeostasis. Our body has a tight range, not just for temperature, but for hydration and potassium and sodium and all kinds of things. Our brain looks at all change outside a pretty tight range as a risk, not just bad change. Nobody's surprised when I say, hey, you're going to have some stress chemicals if you get a voice message from your doctor's office saying, please call us back about your lab work, right? Everybody's like, oh my gosh, that's stressful. But good change, and what we call neutral change, is also stressful, meaning causes our brain to emit these stress chemicals to keep us safe. All right. So people don't believe me until we use an example. So I'm going to pick on you. Chantell, can you think of something in the past year that happened that you knew at the time it happened that it was good news?
Sure.
Okay. Would you share with us something that you found out in the last year?
Yeah, sure. My daughter was going to the world championship for ballroom dancing. So it was great news. Yeah.
So you found out because you were with her when you found out, or it was a text or an email, or how'd you find out?
I was with her.
You were with her. Terrific. So I hope that you felt proud and excited, maybe relieved, all kinds of good things. But at the same time, your brain went through 3 safety mechanisms: loss, distrust, and discomfort. So that might have looked like this. Loss might have been, oh my gosh, when is that scheduled? What if it conflicts with the big family reunion we promised we'd go to, or that thing I was supposed to do for someone, or I have a work trip and what if I couldn't be there? Right? Loss. Then there's distrust. Did they say her name? Right? Did she really?
That did go through my mind. That's correct. Okay.
Right,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Did she really get it? Was that really like, wait, play that back again? Or you turned to everybody else? Did everybody else hear what I heard? And then discomfort. How much more practice is this going to mean for her? How expensive are those costumes going to be? How's that travel going to work? How many family members are we really taking? We don't do well on long car rides. Can we afford for everyone to fly? Loss, distrust, and discomfort don't mean that you're not thrilled. They don't mean there's something wrong with you for having those thoughts. They are your brain's safety, like speed bumps, to just keep you safe.
So, okay, so let's go into that a little bit further, right? So why are we so in tuned to automatically think of those things like that? I mean, you're right. It was like a total happy moment. Why do we even go through that process with our head of all the negative or kind of doubt type of things?
Because your brain has a million functions, but it only has one job. And that job is to keep you alive. That's it.
Okay.
Everything is geared towards keeping you alive. And currently, great news, we're alive. So any change is suspect. Getting the job you really wanted, having someone ask you to do something you've been longing to do, winning the lottery, everything your brain says, cool, but could we die though? Everything.
Okay,
and
that's
so
fair. Okay, that's fair.
Right?
Yeah.
So because that's true, because all change is stressful, but some change is good, stress can't all be damaging. As a matter of fact, we all know when we think about it that we have an optimal range, right? I talked about temperature. There's an optimal range outside, Chantell, for you that you love to be outside. It might be like 75 to 85 degrees. Or for someone else, it might be 60 to 70 degrees. But you have an optimal range where you're like, I could be out here all day, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody has that. We have an optimal range for sleep. And each person's a little different. We have an optimal range for all kinds of things, including stress. So if you have too much stress coming at you from too many directions or too much at once, for sure, it pushes you out of your optimal range. And you get all those symptoms that you think about when you say, well, stress is poison, headaches, heart attacks, ulcers, swirling depressive thoughts, anxiety, crying, sleeplessness, eating everything in sight, not exercising the way you mean to. That's when you're getting pushed out of your optimal range too high. But then you have to consider that it's dangerous to be too low also. Chantell, if you and your partner are laying in bed at night and somebody smells smoke, do you go back to sleep?
Not usually. No, I try to get them to get up. Yeah, exactly.
Sure,
go check out what's happening.
It's because your brain says, nope, it would not be safe to risk dying in a house fire. Okay, so we're going to just check. It is stress that keeps you alive. It's stress that keeps you from, when you're driving 70 miles an hour down the highway, from looking down and texting for a minute solid. You look up because your brain knows you could die. It takes just like this much stress to keep you alive. And way too much stress can kill you. That's your physiologic range where you can live from a tiny, tiny bit of stress, just enough to stay alive and not, play in traffic, to so much stress you can barely breathe. That's your physiologic range. But you have an optimal range in the middle of that somewhere where your stress is getting you to pay attention to the stuff that really matters to you and to excel at it.
Okay, so let's go into that. Okay, so you're right, because I'm sitting here trying to think to myself, well, how do we utilize that stress in a positive way to enhance ourselves professionally, personally? So give me some examples of how we can utilize that to our benefit.
There's two things you can do. I want you to think about the changes you choose. You can curate your stress. Meaning, Chantell, do you have any pets you've adopted at your house?
Yes, unfortunately too, yes.
Right, so I'm a big fan of animals, but anybody who's ever adopted a pet knows it's stressful.
Oh, for sure. Worse than kids. Right? I'll just say that right now, yes.
Right, for sure. They don't pee where you want them to. They make noise you don't want them to. They smell, it can be really difficult. But you chose that change. You chose that stress because the goal was worth it, right? You wanted to be the family that had those pets, to teach your kids the things it can teach them, to comfort them, to be a part of things. It's how you pictured it. It was part of aiming towards the life you choose. With your business, you've curated stress. You've chosen to launch and continue doing a podcast. It has a lot of change and a lot of stress, but you chose it because it is the direction you want towards your goals, right? So one thing we can do is make sure that the stress we can choose, and there's a lot of stress we don't choose, it chooses us. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But the stress we choose, make sure that it's aligned with your priorities. Make sure it's the path you want.
Okay, so when you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, okay, yes, I'm doing this podcast. I'm putting myself out there. I'm being vulnerable. And in my mind, I'm thinking the reason I'm doing that, even though it can be stressful for me, is because I want to help other people. I want to help other women know that, hey, you're not alone. We've all battled with some of these things. And, these are some of the things that I've done to help, get over those. But is that the type of positive stress that can help me?
Yes. Because, it is a really important topic to talk about. How does this stress help us? And I'm going to go back to that exercise analogy. If I told you I was going to run a marathon, by the way, I am not, but if I told you I was going to run a marathon, you might say to me, oh, what are you doing to train for it? And if I said, nothing, I just registered, you might think, bless your heart.
You're crazy. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Yes.
You could die. People have died trying to run marathons who didn't train at all. That sounds like a terrible idea. Or if I said to you, I don't know, I just figured I'd not pay attention to where I parked and wander around the parking lot sometimes, and that's how I'll get ready for this marathon. Also, not that useful. But if I said to you, oh yeah, I'm not really a runner, but I found a coaching regimen, I'm drinking more water and I'm getting more sleep and I'm doing a little bit of walking every day, and the next month I'm going to start running a little bit, you'd be like, if she sticks with it, it might work out, right? She's got a year. Now, the analogy there towards stress you choose is that when you picture your goals, like a year from now or 5 years from now, some things are different, right? Maybe your kids are older, so you have a different relationship with them. Maybe there's friendships you want to grow, or a hobby you want to get better at, or changes you want in your career. But there's change between now and then. So the way you get more resilient, meaning better able to navigate change towards a positive goal, because that's all resilience is, navigating change towards a positive goal. The way you get more resilient is through stress. Stress is to resilience as exercise is to body fitness.
Interesting. Okay. So, with fitness, I can talk about that. So how do you get better? You continue to practice, practice, practice. With stress, are you saying that, again, we should put ourselves in situations that are positive to stress, or how do we build that resilience?
So with the change you choose, I want you to be intentional about it. I want you to say, hey, this is a lot right now, given the other things that I'm dealing with. And so it would be too much for me to start by trying to run 10 miles on Saturday, having never run. So that's too much, but I will do a little bit of that, or I'm not going to say yes to this because, by the way, that idea that women say yes to too many things, it's true, but boundaries isn't only saying no, because every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. It's just usually to yourself, to your own sleep, to your own hobbies, to your own whatever, sense of well-being. So I want you to align. Setting good boundaries means aligning your choices with your priorities. That's what setting good boundaries is. But we have to talk about where my exercise analogy falls down, which is that you choose exercise or you don't exercise. But even if you don't choose stress, some stress chooses you.
Okay, so how do we deal with that? Because that's what, when you talk about stress, that's what I think. Okay, all the things that I don't want to be dealing with, that I'm having to deal with that are beyond my control.
Yes. Now, it's not the only things that are bringing you stress, but because it's unexpected or because it's unplanned, it's harder to manage. So for that huge bucket, the stress that chooses us, I mentioned that we experience like any change, right? So the call from the doctor's office, I'm going to use a terrible example. You see a message that says, please call your doctor to discuss your lab work. Loss, distrust, discomfort, tons of it. That cycle, loss, distrust, discomfort that comes into our brain with any change, good, bad, neutral, whatever, we all experience. We may not notice it. If what you got is a parking ticket, you go through loss, distrust, and discomfort real quick, so quick that you may not even notice it. If what happens is you go in to put in your coffee order and they're like, oh, I'm really sorry, the roaster's down. What kind of pour over do you want? You go through loss, distrust, and discomfort so fast you probably don't notice it. Can't find your car keys because they're not where you left them. Probably you go through it really quickly. But for the big stuff, oh my gosh, the doctor wants to talk to me. What if something's terribly wrong? The next step in the resilience cycle is choice. You don't even have to list the choices. If you simply ask yourself, what choices do I have? I'll use the parking ticket as an example. I could pay it right away. I could take pictures of where my car is and fight it. I could throw it in the glove box, deal with it later. I could stick it under Chantell's wiper and see if she pays it. Right? I've got all kinds of choices. But as soon as I think to myself, wow, what choices do I have? You light up a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Don't worry, there's no quiz. And that, as a reflex, calms the amygdala. All that loss, distrust, and discomfort, those stress chemicals, they come out of the amygdala. But it's like you can't breathe in and breathe out at the same time. You can't light up the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala at the same time. So as soon as you ask yourself, what choices do I have about this parking ticket? Or what choices do I have about this phone call from my doctor? Or what choices do I have about what I'm going to do with my lottery winnings? Whatever it is, as soon as you ask yourself, what choices do I have? That lights up the prefrontal cortex, which dampens the amygdala and cools our response a little bit. Just one more step. What's my goal? If my goal is to get this parking ticket off my mind as fast as I can, I'm going to pay it on my phone right then. If my goal is not to spend a penny I don't have to spend, I'm going to fight it. Right? So as soon as you figure out your goal, that'll guide your choices.
Okay, fascinating. So how do we utilize this in the corporate world or as leaders? I mean, we talk about, being a mom, you kind of use the mom example, but let's talk about as leaders. I mean, how do we utilize this in a positive to help our staff, help our teams be okay with change? What can we do as leaders to help facilitate that calmness around everyone?
There are two things that leaders can do. And the first one is harder because it involves changing our own mindset as leaders. So Chantell, you are welcome to argue with me. But my observation of myself as a leader and other leaders is that when we announce a well-considered change and people push back, we think one of two things. Either we think, well, what kind of referendum is that on my leadership? Don't they trust me? Don't they know I've thought this through? Don't they know I'm smart about this? Don't they know I have experience in this? Don't they know I want what's best for them and for our organization? right? We feel betrayed. Or we think it's a referendum on them. What kind of people are these? Why are they closed-minded, old-fashioned, stubborn, difficult, right? We think it's a referendum on their character. It's not a referendum on our leadership, and it's not a referendum on their character. It's a reflex. It's a neurochemical reflex. It is their brain trying to keep them safe. When I speak about this in front of large corporate audiences, I will get off the stage and go out into the audience, and there will be a guy sitting with his legs crossed. And I'll say, excuse me, may I come close to you? I'm not going to touch you. And he's like, I guess. And I say, I want you to imagine that you've come in to see me. I'm a physician. I'm a family doc. I do a lot of physicals. That you've come in to see me. And we've talked for a while, and I've listened with my stethoscope. And now I take out my reflex hammer. And if right now I tapped your knee, what would happen? And he'll say, I'd kick. And I say, yes, if your brain is healthy, you'd kick. And then I stand very close to him, right in front of him. And I say, what if I tapped your knee right now with my reflex hammer? And he will say, I'd kick you. And I said, yes. And who would you blame? Would you be embarrassed that you kicked me? And he'd be like, women will sometimes say, yes, I would be terribly embarrassed. But men say,
no.
Women often would say, I'm terribly embarrassed. Oh my goodness. But men say, no, it's your fault. And I say, that's right. If I stood right in front of you and tapped on your knee and got kicked, that was my fault. And then I walk back up on stage and I say, and as leaders, we announce change all the time. Stand right in front of our people and get mad when we get kicked.
That's a great analogy. That's an amazing way of putting it. I love the example because I'm sitting here, I'm following you in the crowd, waiting for you to find that person that's legs are crossed. Well, what do we do?
And so the first thing we can do as leaders is to recognize that there is no such thing as the right change announcement so that everybody will be happy about change. So change your expectation. Recognize that it's a reflex. I still check my patient's reflexes. I just stand to the side.
Fair. So what do we do with our kids? I mean, so how do we teach our kids this? I mean, so we talk about stress with kids. Kids are so different because they don't understand or know, how to deal with all their emotions yet. And so how do we even take this aspect and take it to our children and teach them how to become resilient at a young age, or how to deal with those big emotions that, you and I might go, oh my gosh, this is really the biggest thing we're dealing with in the world. How do we deal with those things?
Well, actually, I'm going to answer this question by answering your last question, because the other thing that we can do to help our team, our staff as leaders to handle change more competently, I don't want to say that they'll love it because they won't necessarily. I don't want to say more readily because it depends on what else they're going through or how at risk this makes them feel. So if you change your payroll system, that's how people get paid. It's how they get their PTO. It's how they keep their families safe. There's no way you could make them love it. But what we want to do is make them more competent at it. And there are a few ways. But the biggest thing that we can do, both for our teams and for our kids, because we have very little control over either group when it comes to it, is to point out times in the past that they've handled things well and ask them their expertise. How did that go well? What did you do there that helped you when, I know you had, I'll use a social example that a kid might have. They might come home and be like, everything about my schedule this year is terrible in school because I'm not with any of my friends. And so you dig through your memory of another time that they were doing an activity or in a place where they felt like they'd been separated from their social group and say, I remember that this was hard that time. What did you do to navigate it? What did you do to be resilient then? And you can do that with your team without sounding parental. You can absolutely say, hey, so when we had a software rollout this other time, it was hard and frustrating. We eventually did have the uptake though. We adopted it. What did we do well that was really resilient about that? How did we navigate that change well, which is what resilience is? And what could we do to be more resilient this time?
So it's almost like role playing with them to a certain degree in regards to putting it back on them.
It's saying you're an expert in you.
Yeah.
So, and I might say to you, Chantell, your own resilience, when you are really feeling like there's too much change coming at you too quickly, what strategies do you use to get back on even ground?
Yeah, great question. And I'm not sure I've figured them all out yet. But I do think of how have I dealt with things in the past similar to this, and what were the results? If it was a good result, maybe I should try it again. If it wasn't, let's try a different strategy. So it's exactly what you're telling me, because that's kind of rolls through our heads as to, our past experiences and, what was the outcome? Was it what we wanted or not? And so I guess what you're saying is kind of doing the same thing. We already kind of know what we need to do. It's just putting that into action.
Or if we don't know what to do, another resilience skill is figuring out, who do I know that's more of an expert in this than I am? Building connections and knowing which connections you can tap for what need. We consider that a part of leadership. It's actually a resilience skill.
Oh, interesting.
Setting boundaries that we mentioned is a resilience skill. It helps us to navigate change towards a positive goal when we are aligning our choices with our priorities. Chantell, I know that you've been through a lot in the last couple of years. You're more resilient now than you were then, but resilience is a growth commodity, which means it can go up, but it can also drop unexpectedly. When you're going through a really hard time, you may find that things that ordinarily would not bother you at all, a mix up at the bank, and they're telling you that your account has a different amount than it does, and you have to go in and talk to them and argue with them. There's times in your life where you're like, oh, well, that's an annoyance. And times in your life where you're like, that's too heavy to lift right now. I can't do that. So understanding as a leader and as a parent and as a woman that resilience is a set of skills, but there's no guarantee that you will always be as resilient as you mean to be. There are things that can drain our resilience temporarily, and we got to allow for that in ourselves.
So it's fascinating we're having this conversations right now, because obviously, my mom passed away recently, unexpectedly. And I will tell you, I thought I was resilient until that. And it's a whole nother level that I just never knew existed. And I have to tell you, even the example you just gave, used to things that would just totally roll off my back. They don't. And I don't know why. And I think it's, like you said, it's where you are in life and what's happening around you as to what you can take and what you can't. And I've had to learn self-compassion to myself, and hey, it's okay to not always let everything roll. I have my own emotions to deal with at the same time. But I will say with Definity, at this point in time in my life, I'm more resilient than I've ever been because of the things I've had to go through. Would I prefer them not to have happened? Absolutely. But I can truly say that I feel as though I'm picking up some of those techniques that you're talking about and learning how to embed them within myself, which is really, I hate to say, not about everybody else, but more about me and my own survival and calming my own stress. And so, again, funny how life works and the timing of having this conversation, because I had a situation happen yesterday with it and just being agitated. And so, things that I used to not. So I appreciate you saying, it's different times and different places in your life, and how do we deal with those? And it's okay. It's okay to kind of be where you are, basically.
I'd like to leave you with a perspective that it isn't just that you went through the hard things. I bet everybody who's in the sound of our voices right now can recognize things they've gone through that taught them something, that they got a little stronger for it, even though it was flipping awful to go through it. But I want everybody to give themselves some credit, because just going through hard things doesn't build your resilience. Let me prove that to you, Chantell. Can you think, and I will not ask you who, I promise, but can you think of an adult that no matter what she goes through, it never seems to get any easier for her?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right. So if just going through hard things was enough, we wouldn't know grownups like that. You have to go through it, and you have to make the choice to learn from it.
Sometimes those are hard lessons learned. And I'm not going to sit here and say I've got it all figured out. I'm still really early in my journey with my new norm, but that's a great point. And there are days I don't want to get out of bed. There are days I, just don't even want to face the world. Let's just be honest. But then again, I'm like, but at the end of the day, I know what I have to give to the world, and that resilience, it overcomes any type of, sadness or depression, because I know as soon as I see those happy faces around me and that support group that it will make my life better. What are some tangible action items for the listeners to say, okay, how do I take everything we've talked about today and incorporate it into 2 or 3 steps that I could take in my own life right now that's going to help me just deal with life a little bit better?
Okay. I love that challenge. I'm going to give you an acronym because our brains like acronyms. That helps us remember things.
Yes.
When you are thinking about a stress, a change that you're struggling with, even if it's a great change, maybe you and your family bought a new business, or you're welcoming a new child into that family, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. You don't have to put a qualitative or value judgment on the change, but you are dealing with a change that is taking a lot of your energy and it doesn't feel great. I want you to use this acronym, GIG, G-I-G. The first G is give yourself a minute. Remember that doctor on the podcast who said that all change is stressful? Have a little empathy for yourself. Just give yourself a minute. Do something that helps you self-regulate, to self-soothe, right? Something that isn't damaging to you, that isn't dangerous, that helps you self-soothe. So G, give yourself a minute. The I, interrogate that stress. I want you to ask it 2 questions. Is it avoidable or unavoidable? I'm going to use the example of adopting a pet because I don't care what your kids tell you. That's avoidable, right? You could say no. So is it avoidable or unavoidable? So I've said, okay, this one's avoidable. Is it useful or useless? Meaning, does it get me more towards the life I want or less? So as a leader, let's use a business example. If you are really struggling with moving to using an outsourced HR department, right? You've decided that this is what makes sense financially for your business and you've made the change, but boy, it's causing you some sleepless nights or a lot of more conversations than you thought you were going to have. A lot of people second guessing. So you give yourself a minute, right? It's not because I'm a bad leader. It's not necessarily that I made a bad decision. All change is stressful. Whew. Okay. You interrogate it. Is this avoidable or unavoidable? Well, maybe it was avoidable, but now we've done it. But even if it was avoidable, is it useless or useful? Well, it's getting me more towards the company that I want to run. It's getting me to a leaner financial company or a company with more resources that we can access or whatever it is. It's getting us more towards the future I want. Okay, it's useful. So if this change is unavoidable or useful or both, now we're going to go to the last step. And that last G is get to your goal. Resilience is not about winning. It's about working towards your goal.
That's amazing. I absolutely love that. And I love GIG because I can remember that easily. So you're absolutely right. And those are great steps that any of us can take in every aspect of our life, whether it's personal or professional. I love give it a minute, because sometimes we knee jerk and we make decisions. We go, why did I do that? So I love that. Give it a minute.
We judge ourselves. Yes. Oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling this way? Why aren't I stronger?
That's right. And that's right. So it's giving yourself a little bit of a break to just say, hey, take a breath. So I love that. Well, Dr. G, just one more thing. I mean, obviously you have an immense amount of knowledge for my listeners. How can my listeners find you? I mean, tell us how we can get more information on all the things that you talk about.
The easiest way to find me centrally located is online, and my website is askdrg.com. Also, I have an online think tank that I run once a month called Dr. G's Think Tank on Resilience. I'm happy to give you the link if you're okay with dropping it in the show notes. It doesn't cost anything. It's just 45 minutes at lunchtime. And I would welcome everybody to come and take part.
Well, Dr. G, thank you so much. And thank you for all the work you're doing for not just women, but everybody as a whole. And especially, I have a big heart for kids and actually making our kids more resilient and better with the crazy world that we live in today. So thank you again so much for being here. And yes, everyone reach out, take a look, because I think that there's an immense amount of knowledge out there that Dr. G has that I'd love for you to tap into, because I know it's been incredibly helpful for me. So thanks again, Dr. G.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Get Real, Get Results. Now get off your ass, get out there, and enjoy the life that you want to live. We're here if you need guidance. And until next time, do your best, enjoy the small victories, and stay unstoppable. And don't forget to visit ChantellPreston.com for coaching or keynote booking information. And remember, you have to get real to get results.